On March 12th, year 682 of the Zitan calendar, 5,000 people were sent into the Etzer maze, and by September 12th of the very same year, historians estimate that roughly 700 of those people were still alive. Some died because of dehydration, others from starvation, but most of them were killed. To understand what happened in those 6 months, we need to look back in time a bit, 20 years to be more specific. The current emperor of Zitan, a huge and prospering nation, was facing what he believed to be a moral dilemma. With a strong military and a bustling economy, his empire was thriving. It was nearly perfect. Nearly. The dregs of society, no matter how far away from the capital they lived, still weighed heavily on his perfectionist mind. If only he could just remove them, then, according to his journal, his nation would be complete. Initially, he thought of just killing them, but he understood that would only incite a rebellion. Banishing them wouldn't work either. After all, what self-respecting nation is going to accept thousands of people who don't contribute to society? After a couple months of this pondering, one of his advisors proposed a unique plan, unlike any the world had seen in years prior. Lock them up in one very remote, very inescapable destination, but provide them with enough supplies to last at least a year. On April 24th, year 661 of the Zitan calendar, the Emperor of Zitan ordered for the renovations on the Etzer maze to commence. This fortress was considered to be the most impervious structure which had ever been built at the time. The structure's giant size made it the perfect holding structure for almost 20,000 people. So, renovations began, with nearly 200 men working the better part of 20 years to fortify the maze against any attempt to break out. Historical records show that, due to the size of the building, it was one of the most difficult projects in the history of the Empire, second only to the 500 years it took to create the maze in the first place. Finally, on January 7th, year 682, the renovations were considered complete. In less than a month, the Empire managed to round up roughly 5,000 people. Former criminals, beggars, poor tradesmen, and the like were given two options. Either surrender yourself to slavery, or gather all that you can carry and make your way to the maze. While there was expected resistance with this new decree, it was well within what the Emperor and his court had expected. A few riots broke out, but they were swiftly quelled by the Empire's forces, and any dissenters of the decree were either killed for their supposed treason or simply forced into slavery, making an example for those who would have otherwise acted in a similar manner. On March 12th, year 682, 5,000 people were sent into the Etzer maze. Amongst these 5,000 people, one man's name was scorched into the history books: Alton. He was considered responsible for the deaths of close to 4,000 people. According to one of his companions' journals, before his life in the maze, Alton was one of 200 builders who had done the renovations for the maze, giving him the knowledge that almost nobody else in the Empire had. Additionally, Alton was the leader of a new group of almost 30 people, who the surviving maze dwellers had later dubbed the Upper Dwellers. While the rest of the people filed into the maze, many hauling as much goods as their cart horses could physically carry, historians theorize that the Upper Dwellers likely used Alton's knowledge of the maze to immediately make their way upwards from the first floor. And, once on the second floor, they used the materials they were allowed to bring in order to conceal the stairwells to the upper floors before anyone else could discover them, effectively monopolizing the upper floors for themselves. As for the rest of the people who were now effectively trapped on the first floor, life was going to get much harder. Despite being allowed to bring as many supplies as they could possibly want, and being provided a week's worth of provisions, if the maze dwellers couldn't find a better source of water for their livestock and for themselves, then they would likely all die of dehydration within the first month. After the Empire sealed the entrance, many of the new maze dwellers had dispersed, off to explore their new home. Along the west wall of the Etzer maze was a series of rooms which contained enormous water wells. Those dwellers who were lucky enough to have found the wells managed to survive those first 2 weeks. As for those who didn't, they died. In total, modest estimates put the number of those who died within the first month at roughly 300 people. By the 2-month mark of living in the maze, people had gotten settled into their own communities formed with other dwellers, usually built around one of the well rooms. There was an underlying tension within all the maze dwellers at the time, a tension regarding food. From what we can infer, the dwellers realized that farming was going to be much slower inside the maze, given the low artificial light and the lack of fertile soil. This, and the already dwindling supply of food for many of the communities, posed a serious threat. Some people, quick on the uptake, supposedly started to steal food from other dweller communities, going so far as to kill other dwellers in order to rob them of their supplies. The tipping point came one day, almost 4 months after the entrance had been sealed, when the dweller communities discovered an entire community of almost 100 people, many of which were women and children, all slaughtered by the group led by Alton, purely for the sake of stealing the only livestock the group had, 20 chickens. This single event radicalized hundreds of people. Records indicate that within 24 hours of the dead community being discovered, a total of roughly 17 communities, ranging from populations of 10 to 200 people, formed an alliance historians would later call the First Adzarian Alliance, in an attempt to hunt down the horrific people who would commit such a heinous act. They went after, and ultimately killed, nearly every single community outside of the Alliance, whether they were guilty or not. This bloodbath lasted for almost 2 weeks, as the group of what is estimated to be 700 people scoured every inch of the first floor for any signs of life. Amongst all this violence, a former farmer named Turner grew ever suspicious. Turner, despite his humble background, had managed to become one of the more influential leaders of the Alliance. His suspicions revolved around the chickens themselves. More specifically, of all the communities who the Alliance slaughtered, there were no signs of the missing chickens in any of them. When he asked the other Alliance members to investigate, they also mentioned that the 20 missing chickens hadn't been found anywhere else. Turner had suspected that there was a completely unknown community, hiding from the rest of the maze dwellers, and that they were the ones responsible for the initial slaughter. To test out his theory, Turner had the Alliance spread the information that they were going to move a small herd of cattle through a fairly unpopulated area. He wagered that if there was another group in hiding, this would be their best opportunity to show up, and if they did, then they'd be taken in and questioned. True to his theory, there was in fact another community, specifically the upper dwellers, and they did try and steal the cattle. But fortune wasn't on their side this time, as the ambush that Turner had set up for them had them outnumbered 4 to 1. The records aren't truly clear about what happened next, but most historians agree that it is very likely that the upper dwellers were interrogated, and once they divulged how to get to the upper floors, they were killed. The reaction of the maze dwellers to the upper floors was described by a first-hand onlooker as the most bittersweet emotion that one could ever feel. The floor was lined, from floor to ceiling, with rations, enough to feed an army of 10,000 for almost an entire year. Had they been able to make their way up to this floor earlier, had the upper dwellers not tried to hide the upper floor, almost 4,000 people could have survived. It was all because of greed and fear that they all had died.